A generous woman fought with an elderly lady when a luxury car stopped in front of her house, and 3 young men got out of it. Hello, welcome. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The thunder roared, waking Sarah. The woman opened her eyes to the sound of rain hitting the windowpane. A May storm, she reflected. The last month of spring had been warm and dry, making the rain a welcome change. She opened the curtains to admire the rain washing the dust off the young leaves. Looking down, she noticed a large black car in the deserted street. Next to it stood 3 men, 2 dressed in black and the third near the car, wearing jeans and a white shirt. He seemed to be looking for someone among the apartment windows. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Sarah rushed through the hallway, but Jeanette overtook her. The woman was already awake, preparing breakfast, so she reached the door first. Jeanette said that the neighbor's boy, Tomé, had come to pick up his grandmother. They have a nice car and look serious. They gave me. Wait. Who came? Jeanette interrupted. I don't know. They just asked me to call you, the boy replied. Sarah looked at Tomé, surprised. She hadn't expected anyone for a long time and was sure no one was looking for her. Jeanette turned to the elderly woman and asked, "Do you understand what's going on?" "I absolutely don't," Jeanette replied. "But indeed, there's a car parked there, and strangers are near it." "Stay here, I'll see what's happening," Jeanette said resolutely, putting on her shoes and throwing a light blouse over her dress. She left the apartment, closed the door behind her, and headed downstairs, with Tomé following. Sarah was from a small mountain town in a typical family, where most men worked at the steel plant, the only large company in town. Sarah's father, Juliano, was also a steelworker. He married Rebecca, Sarah's mother, shortly after returning from military service. They had loved each other since school and dreamed of having a big, happy family. However, after Sarah's birth, Rebecca couldn't get pregnant again, and Juliano longed for a son, or better, several sons. His dissatisfaction with his wife and resentment for her inability to provide heirs often led to arguments. "You're nothing. Why do I need such a useless woman like you?" Juliano would cause a scene, and Rebecca would try to shield their daughter from it. Sarah didn't do well in school, often getting bad grades. However, Rebecca always encouraged her daughter to seek further education or a vocational course. She always emphasized the importance of having a profession in today's world. "Without a profession, you can't survive," her mother would say. "You can become a hairdresser, a cook, or even a seamstress, but you must be able to work." Rebecca had high hopes that Sarah would be her pillar of support in old age since there was no one else she could rely on. But at 16, Sarah got pregnant. For several months, she managed to hide her sin, but when her belly became visibly round, she had to confess to her mother, who, trembling with fear, told her husband. Juliano's shouts and curses that night were heard throughout the street. He yelled so loudly that the walls shook, and dishes rattled in the cupboard. "You little brat! I'll take that thing out of your belly and that nonsense out of your head," he raged around the house, shaking his daughter and throwing objects in anger. "You've disgraced us. People will say that Juliano's daughter is a disgrace." "Juliano, calm down. Our daughter shouldn't be upset now," Rebecca tried to soothe her husband. "Oh, she shouldn't be upset, but she can flirt with men," the father shouted, inflexible. "Step aside, mother. I'll teach her a lesson." "No, Juliano. Don't touch your daughter. I'll take her to the doctor tomorrow, and we'll sort everything out." Rebecca went to the cupboard where she had a bottle of whiskey hidden behind other dishes, grabbed a shot glass, slammed it on the table, and poured it. "Drink, Juliano. Drink and calm down." The man quickly emptied his glass, and Rebecca poured him another. She knew that after a few drinks, her husband would relax and maybe wouldn't hit Sarah. She didn't want to take her bruised, pregnant daughter to the doctor's office. Walking in silence after leaving the women's clinic the next day, Sarah and Rebecca wondered what the future held. The pregnancy was advanced, and nothing could be done about it. Instead, the doctor instructed them to complete a medical exam and run tests. When asked about the baby's father, Sarah claimed there wasn't one. "I should report this to the police and Child Protective Services," the doctor said sternly. "You need to tell me who did this to you. He was just passing through town. He's gone now, and I don't know where he is. Do you even know his name or where he's from?" When Sarah remained silent, the doctor sighed. Juliano and Rebecca were worried about their daughter, and she seemed obsessed with the baby, knitting sweaters and booties with wool. The decorated caps adorned the room. Her only focus was the baby she was expecting. Sarah's baby decided to arrive much earlier than expected. She gave birth to a boy in the 8th month. From the start of labor until the baby's birth, Sarah's parents stayed in the hospital, not leaving until everything was fine. Rebecca prayed. "Stop complaining," Juliano interrupted rudely. "At least be glad she won't be a disgrace with a belly anymore, giving the neighbors something to talk about and embarrass us." When the doctor came out to speak with the parents, both approached her anxiously. "How is our daughter, doctor?" asked the worried Rebecca. "Your daughter has given birth," said the doctor, but before she could finish, Juliano grabbed her by the elbow and pulled her aside. "I need to talk to you urgently," he insisted, his determined expression preventing the doctor from arguing. "Very well, come to my office," she replied. Rebecca moved to join them, but her husband stopped her. "Wait here," he said. "I'll be right back." Feeling the neighbors' eyes on her. Of course, not everyone looked at her with disdain. Some women pushing strollers lowered and averted their gaze upon seeing her. They feared imagining what the young woman who had lost her child must be feeling. They even feared putting themselves in her shoes, even momentarily, as they had healthy babies in their strollers. 2 years had passed, and Sarah's mother hoped that her daughter's soul would gradually heal and that she would return to her old self. But it seemed something had irreparably broken within her. After graduation, the girl found a job at a supermarket, showing no interest in continuing her studies. Her father now drank every night. After coming home from work, he would sit at the kitchen table, demanding a bottle and a glass. Rebecca automatically bought alcohol after work to avoid his wrath if there was nothing to drink at home. "Juliano, what are you doing to yourself? Why are you ruining your health?" she would ask. "Shut up, you fool," Juliano rudely replied. "It numbs my sin, my poor sin." His wife, out of obligation, would pour the bitter drink into his glass. Another 2 years passed, and this Saturday night mirrored countless others. Juliano relaxed in the kitchen with a beer while Rebecca cooked at the stove. Their daughter Sarah would soon be home from work and would need to be fed. "Juliano, maybe it's time to stop drinking. Maybe you could watch some TV," Rebecca suggested. "Leave me alone." "What's that? Watch soap operas? Nonsense. Tell me, will our daughter mourn the baby forever? She should be married by now. How long has she been a burden to us?" "She's not a burden to you. She earns her own money," Rebecca retorted. "I know, but a woman needs a man, or she'll be completely lost," he insisted. "Calm down. She's been through so much. God forbid, don't you feel sorry for her? Rebecca put a lid on the pot and turned off the stove. Let her feel sorry. All women are the same, Juliano sneered. The sound of the door opening echoed down the hall. Moments later, Sarah appeared in the kitchen, but the man beside her seemed about 10 years older. Mom, Dad, meet Paulo. We're planning to live together, Sarah announced, leaving her parents stunned. Hello, the man greeted them. Rebecca and Juliano were shocked, their gazes shifting between Sarah and Paulo. They hadn't expected such a move from their daughter. Rebecca had assumed Sarah wasn't seeing anyone and certainly wasn't planning to marry. Well, great, Juliano extended his hand to the young man. Come, sit at the table. Rebecca, set the table and get another glass for our guest. Let's talk. The family gathered for dinner. Rebecca placed the dishes on the table, serving pasta and meatballs, then sat down. Sarah ate in silence with her eyes lowered, seemingly indifferent to everything happening around her. Well, let's toast to getting to know each other, the father raised his glass, and Paulo joined him, downing his drink in one gulp. How long have you two been together? Juliano asked. 1 week now, Sarah replied, playing with her food. Not long, I must admit, Juliano scratched his neck and refilled the glasses. And have you two decided to get married? No, we won't have a wedding, his daughter replied. Why not? We've decided it's not worth spending money on a pointless wedding, Paulo interrupted. There's no sense in gathering a crowd of unnecessary people. And you think it's acceptable to get married without a proper ceremony? You think so? Juliano retorted, getting irritated. Absolutely, Paulo responded, taking another sip. Look, Rebecca, at what they're doing, the father, now quite drunk, continued indignantly. I'll be laughed at in a factory for marrying off my daughter without inviting my team. You can invite your colleagues and celebrate our future happy life with them, Paulo replied. Have a drink and a bite with them. What do we care? Who are they to us? Juliano studied his future son-in-law closely, then pounded his fist on the table, causing the dishes to rattle, and Paulo's empty glass to topple over. I decide what's important and what's not, he shouted. Calm down, Juliano, Rebecca urged, realizing that a serious scandal or even a fight could break out from this spark of anger. Juliano took another sip, calming down a bit before continuing the conversation. And where do you two plan to live? Paulo has his own one-bedroom apartment. It'll be enough for us, Sarah replied. Her tone was devoid of emotion, and she remained indifferent to her father's disapproval, calmly pouring tea for the men. You better drink your tea, or you'll both end up completely drunk, she said. All right, housing is sorted, the man approved. Where do you work? Not in a factory, no. Sorry, that life's not for me, Paulo replied. I own a small clothing store at the market. I buy cheap in the capital and sell for a higher price here. So, you're a trader, Juliano interrupted. Why should I be a trader? Paulo objected. I'm an entrepreneur. All the same, Juliano dismissed with a wave of his hand. He fell silent for a moment, then asked in a more peaceful tone, Are you in love or what? Juliano, love isn't the main thing these days, Paulo answered. What's more important is trust, support, and financial stability between a husband and wife. In the past, girls married without love and still managed to build strong, prosperous families. Don't talk nonsense, Juliano argued, pointing a finger. In the old days, parents chose the spouses. But you just showed up out of nowhere. We know nothing about you, and yet you expect us to hand over our daughter. Paulo leaned back in his chair and smiled ironically. Ask anything you want. I'll answer all your questions. By then, it was dark outside. The dim light from the kitchen barely illuminated the cramped living room where Sarah stood, leaning against the wall, her arms crossed over her chest. She could feel the weight of the day pressing down on her, but the tension in the room was heavier. Her father sat slouched at the small dining table, his fingers loosely gripping a half-empty glass of whiskey, while Paulo, her husband, sat across from him, eyes glazed but intent, nursing his own drink. The two men had been talking for hours, though the conversation had long since shifted from casual chatter to something more serious, her future. Sarah's eyes flickered between them as she listened to their words, both familiar and foreign. "Do what you want," her father finally slurred, his voice thick with alcohol and resignation. His hand waved dismissively in the air, as if wiping away the gravity of what he was saying. "Live your life, Paulo. I see you think like a businessman." The words hung in the air, heavy and dissonant. Paulo's brow furrowed, though he said nothing. His business had failed, and Sarah knew how much that failure had chipped away at him. Her father's comment, meant as a compliment, felt hollow, as if everyone in the room was pretending not to see the cracks forming between them. Sarah swallowed, her throat tight with the bitterness she had tried so hard to suppress. Her father had always taken Paulo's side, ever since they first married, speaking to him as though he were some sort of savior for her, some solution to a problem she hadn't even known existed. But now, as she watched them both drink themselves into oblivion, she felt the absurdity of it all. Paulo was no savior. He was just as lost as she was, if not more. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves that clung to the trees. The sound of the world moving on felt distant, like something happening to someone else. Inside, the conversation continued, but Sarah was no longer listening. Instead, she stared out the small window, her thoughts drifting to the possibilities that lay beyond the dim glow of the kitchen. Maybe there was another path, another life waiting for her, one not dictated by the whims of men lost in their own failures and regrets. But for now, all she could do was stand there, silent, as the world spun on without her. A month later, Sarah and Paulo were married, and Juliano proudly declared to his wife, "Now no one can call my daughter a loose woman. She's a married woman now." Giuliano's relief was palpable, though his declaration carried an undercurrent of old-fashioned pride, as if the institution of marriage could erase the past. Rebecca, on the other hand, wasn't sure how to feel. She loved her daughter, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's decision to marry Paulo was rushed and reactive, a desperate attempt to escape the pain that had haunted her since the loss of her child. She worried that this union was more about running from one life than embracing another. Meanwhile, far from Sarah's story, Arthur sat at his desk, mulling over his next move. Moments earlier, he had ended a call with a director at the orphanage. "Ask the director to wait. For anything, I will call you a little later," Arthur had said, his voice calm but his mind in turmoil. "Okay, I'll be waiting for your call," the director had replied before the line went dead. Arthur leaned back in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of the desk. His family had discussed adoption on and off for years, but now, it felt more pressing than ever. Anna, his wife, had longed for a child for a decade. Yet, she was adamant about wanting a newborn, not a toddler, especially not a 2-year-old boy who might already have developed traits and quirks from his early years. She wanted to mold a baby from the start, not adapt to an established personality. Nevertheless, Arthur couldn't forget the director's words. The boy, though only 2 years old, had a lot of potential. He was described as intelligent, curious, and kind-hearted, even if his health was a bit fragile. It wasn't the image of a newborn that Anna had envisioned, but Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps this child was meant to be part of their lives. Despite Anna's hesitation, Arthur made sure to save all the documents in the safe, locking away the papers that detailed the boy's brief history. There was still time to decide, he told himself. It wasn't a yes or no, yet. They needed to talk, and Arthur wasn't ready to bring it up to Anna just now. He knew that any conversation about adoption would need to be handled delicately, considering her emotional investment in having a biological child. Pushing himself away from the desk, Arthur stood up and made his way into the reception area. He had a meeting in 15 minutes, but his mind was far from the business at hand. He couldn't stop thinking about what kind of life he and Anna could provide for this boy if they took the leap. Anna, meanwhile, sat in her studio, shaping clay on the potter's wheel. The repetitive motion calmed her nerves, but beneath the surface, she couldn't stop thinking about the future. She knew Arthur had been distant lately, though he hadn't said much. The question of adoption, once a tentative idea, seemed to linger more heavily in the air. She wasn't sure she was ready to open her heart to a child that wasn't her own, but the pressure was mounting. They were getting older, and time was slipping through their fingers. In the quiet of the studio, Anna's thoughts returned to a conversation she had overheard between Arthur and a friend a few months ago. They had discussed the challenges of adoption, but Arthur had been surprisingly open to the idea, more than Anna had realized at the time. She wondered if he was hiding something from her, perhaps moving ahead with plans she wasn't ready for. As the afternoon sun streamed through the window, Anna wiped her hands on her apron and stood up, determined to confront the issue. She loved Arthur, but she couldn't keep pretending that their desires aligned perfectly when it came to building a family. Back in the reception area, Arthur was jolted from his thoughts as his assistant reminded him of his upcoming meeting. Nodding absently, he walked into the conference room, his mind still spinning with the possibility of what could be. He resolved to speak with Anna that evening, even if it risked upsetting the delicate balance they had maintained for years. That night, as they sat down to dinner, Arthur cleared his throat, preparing to broach the topic. Anna, sensing the weight of what was coming, looked up from her plate, her heart already racing. "Anna," Arthur began, "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we talked about adoption again." Anna didn't respond immediately, but her expression told him everything he needed to know. This conversation was far from over. "I won't be in the office today. Cancel all my appointments," Arthur said firmly before hanging up the phone. His voice carried an unusual weight, one that hinted at more than a simple disruption to his schedule. He had never been one to leave work in the middle of the day. Dedication and routine were hallmarks of his life. Yet today, something had shifted. As he pulled into the driveway of their home, the familiar sight of Anna standing outside, waiting, brought him both comfort and an odd sense of unease. She looked up from the garden, where she had been tending to some late-season flowers, and immediately noticed the tension in his posture. Arthur, a man usually composed and calm, was visibly unsettled. Anna approached him with a mix of curiosity and concern. She reached for his hand as he stepped out of the car, feeling the firmness of his grip, as though he was holding onto her for support. "Arthur, is there a problem at work?" she asked softly, wrapping her arms around him in a warm hug. His body felt heavier than usual, as if carrying an invisible burden. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pressed his face into her shoulder, inhaling the comforting scent of her perfume, grounding himself in her presence. Anna pulled back slightly, just enough to look into his eyes, searching for answers. "Why did you come home so suddenly?" she asked again, her tone gentle but persistent. Arthur sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair as he leaned against the car for a moment. "It's not work," he finally said, his voice quieter now, almost as if he was struggling to find the right words. "I needed to talk to you." Anna's heart skipped a beat. In all their years together, she had never seen him like this. Arthur was always the steady one, the rock that held everything together when life became unpredictable. Now, here he was, looking as though something had unraveled beneath the surface. "Let's go inside," Anna suggested, her voice filled with the same steadiness Arthur usually offered her. She took his hand and led him into the house, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. Once inside, they sat down in the living room, a space that had always been their refuge, the place where they could escape the world's chaos. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on the familiar furniture. But today, even the comfort of their home couldn't shake the tension that had followed Arthur. Anna sat beside him, close enough that their knees touched, waiting patiently for him to speak. She knew not to push him. Arthur always took his time when something weighed heavily on him. She watched as he stared at the floor, his jaw clenched, his hands fidgeting, a rare sight for a man who was usually so composed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Arthur looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Anna," he began, his voice low but steady, "do you remember when we talked about adopting a child?" Anna's breath caught in her throat. The conversation they had once shared, about building their family in a different way, had never quite left her mind. But it had been years since they had seriously discussed it. Life had gotten in the way, as it often did. Their careers, the complications of everyday life, had pushed that dream aside. "Of course, I remember," Anna replied cautiously, unsure of where this was going. "Why are you bringing this up now?" Arthur swallowed hard, his gaze faltering for a moment before he continued. "I got a call today, from the agency. There's a child. A boy, 2 years old. They say he's smart, healthy, and in need of a family." Anna's heart raced. She hadn't expected this. "A 2-year-old boy," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Images of a child began to flood her mind, smiling, playing, growing under their care. But there was a hesitation. She had always imagined adopting a newborn, someone they could raise from the very start, with no history or memories outside of their family. Arthur seemed to read her thoughts. "I know," he said gently. "We always talked about a baby. But Anna, this boy, he needs us. And something inside me, when I heard about him, I couldn't shake the feeling that we need him too." Anna stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the garden she had been working on just moments before Arthur arrived. The flowers, bright and full of life, seemed so simple compared to the complexity of what was being asked of her now. Could she open her heart to this child? Could they change the course of their lives so suddenly? She turned back to Arthur, who was watching her with an expression that was both hopeful and uncertain. "When would we meet him?" she asked, her voice steadier now, though her mind still swirled with doubts. "As soon as we're ready," Arthur said, standing up to join her by the window. "But I don't want to rush you into this. I know it's a lot to process." Anna took a deep breath, her thoughts moving quickly. The idea of a child, of becoming parents, was overwhelming. But as she stood there, next to Arthur, she realized that this might be their chance, their opportunity to become a family in a way they hadn't expected. She turned to him, her decision still forming but growing stronger with each passing second. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, "but I think we should meet him." Arthur nodded, relief washing over his face. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We'll meet him, and we'll figure it out together." Anna rested her head on his shoulder, her mind still buzzing but her heart beginning to settle. They had always been a team, and now, it seemed, they were about to embark on the most important journey of their lives, together. "Actually, I have urgent news to discuss," he replied. "Let's go inside." Arthur led his wife to the door, arm in arm, his expression tense but gentle. The sun was setting outside, casting a warm glow through the windows, but the weight in the air suggested something more serious than a casual evening conversation. They settled into the soft armchairs in the living room, a room they had often shared dreams in, filled with warmth and love. Eliana, their housekeeper and confidant, appeared with a tray, setting 2 steaming cups of tea on the table in front of them. She moved quietly, sensing the gravity of the moment, and left them alone. Anna's eyes never left Arthur. There was a hesitation in his movements she hadn't seen before, and her heart began to beat a little faster as she anticipated what was coming. "Tell me, have you not given up on the idea of adopting a child?" Arthur asked softly, his voice laced with a mixture of hope and concern. His eyes studied her face carefully, as if bracing for her reaction. Anna blinked, momentarily caught off guard. It had been years since they last spoke about adoption. The idea had lingered in their hearts after long, painful discussions about their inability to have more children. The joy that Tarcisio had brought into their lives had made the house feel fuller, but Anna knew deep down that there was still an emptiness, a longing that remained unspoken between them. I haven't, she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. I just thought, after everything, we had decided to leave it be. Arthur nodded slowly, as if he had anticipated her response. His hand reached across the table, gently resting on hers. I thought the same, but something happened today. Something I didn't expect. Anna's heart skipped a beat. What is it? She asked, her voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. Arthur took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before speaking. I received a call from a social worker today. There's a little girl, Penelope. She's 3 years old, just a little older than Tarcisio was when he came into our lives. Her circumstances are complicated, Anna. She lost both her parents recently. The social worker thinks she's a good match for us. Anna felt a sudden rush of emotions, her heart swelling with both excitement and fear. A little girl, she repeated, the words catching in her throat. She imagined a small figure running through the halls of their home, another child to nurture and love. But then the doubts crept in. Arthur, do you think we're ready? After everything with Tarcisio? What if she doesn't fit in? What if it's too much for us? Arthur squeezed her hand gently, his eyes soft and reassuring. I've been thinking about that too. But Anna, we've made a home for Tarcisio. We gave him love, and he gave us so much more in return. We didn't know if we were ready for him either, but look at us now. We're a family. We can do it again. If you're willing. Anna's gaze drifted to the window, where the last rays of sunlight kissed the garden outside. The thought of bringing another child into their lives was overwhelming, but it also sparked something deep within her, a sense of purpose, of fulfillment. Penelope. The name lingered in her mind, and with it, a quiet hope. She turned back to Arthur, her eyes meeting his. Let's meet her, she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her decision. Let's see if we can give her the home she needs. Arthur smiled, a mixture of relief and gratitude washing over his face. Thank you, Anna. I knew you'd understand. As they sat in the quiet comfort of their living room, the possibilities of their future unfolding before them, Anna couldn't help but feel that perhaps this was the next chapter of their story, another chance to bring life and love into their home. And this time, it came in the form of a little girl named Penelope. Arthur, you came home in the middle of the workday to ask me that? Anna's eyes showed confusion and surprise. We could have discussed this tonight. No, we couldn't, Arthur said. Anderson called. There's a boy at the orphanage. He says the boy is smart and handsome. My God, Arthur, there's always a smart, handsome boy at every orphanage, Anna exclaimed. You know, when Anderson said the orphanage director wanted to meet us, my heart started racing. I got excited and wanted to talk to you. There's a family in the countryside that wants to adopt him. It's a rural area where he won't get a good education or opportunities. What can they offer him? But we wanted a baby, Arthur, Anna replied. A 2-year-old boy is still very young. We can raise him as our own child, and he will never know he was adopted. Anna stood up and walked to the window, her gaze falling on the lawn in the garden where she imagined her son and Arthur playing. When do we need to go? She asked without turning around. As soon as possible, her husband responded. I'll call the airport and book the tickets. The next morning, they were on their way to meet the boy who could become their son. 5 hours later, a nervous Anna and Arthur were sitting in the office of the orphanage director. Don't worry so much, Mrs. Lacerda. The boy will be brought in shortly. Would you like some tea or coffee in the meantime? The guests from the capital declined, eager to meet the child. Let me tell you a little about Tarcisio, the director began, pulling the child's file from the cabinet. His 16-year-old mother signed a relinquishment right after his birth. He was born prematurely. I can never understand how someone can abandon their own child, whom they carried in their womb for so long, Anna said sadly. Situations vary, Mrs. Lacerda, the director replied. Not everyone is ready for motherhood. In these cases, it's better for strangers to raise the child than for an anguished mother. At that moment, a teacher entered the office, leading the boy by the hand. He was dragging a toy car on a string behind him. The Lacerdas observed the little blond boy with beautiful blue eyes. Tarcisio looked like he had stepped straight out of a children's book. "Hello, what's your name?" Anna asked, kneeling beside him. "Tarcisio," the boy responded without fear of the unfamiliar woman. "I'm Anna Lacerda, and this is my husband, Arthur," she introduced, glancing at her husband. "How old are you, Tarcisio?" Anna asked. Tarcisio extended his hand, opened 2 fingers, and announced loudly, 2. The adults present laughed at the confident child proudly declaring his age. Tarcisio then moved forward and offered his toy car to Anna. "Do you like playing with cars?" she asked. "Yes." Tarcisio responded enthusiastically. "Would you like to go somewhere with many more cars, and they would all be yours?" she asked. The boy nodded directly and confidently, despite the adults watching him closely. Anna found herself thinking that if she had met Tarcisio under different circumstances, she would never have guessed that his mother had abandoned him and that he had been raised in an orphanage. When Tarcisio was taken away, Arthur and Anna exchanged glances. Throughout their 10 years of marriage, their opinions had always coincided, and it was the same now. Arthur's eyes seemed to say, "This is our boy," while Anna's eyes responded, "We will love him more than life itself." Upon returning home, they began preparing for the adoption. Arthur instructed his lawyer to gather and process all the necessary documents, while Anna was overflowing with anticipation at the thought of finally having a child. "Eliana," she instructed, "clean the room next to ours today. Have all the furniture removed. We'll buy everything new. Clean and wash everything. We need to finish the renovations quickly. This will be Tarcisio's room." "Okay, Mrs. Lacerda, I'll take care of everything," Eliana responded. The next day, a team of repair workers was busy in the children's room. Anna was in the living room with one of the best interior designers from the capital. The young man, dressed in an elegant coat over a ponytail, was presenting potential designs. Anna had contacted him the previous day, asking for a quick design project to decorate the children's room. After working overnight, he was now proudly, though nervously, showing his proposals. "I like this one," Anna said, pointing to a design with a Roman-style washbasin and snow-blue walls. "Great choice. Lots of light, space, and air," the designer responded. "However, all the furniture here is custom-made, which will take some time," the designer warned. "How long do you need?" interrupted Anna. "I think about a month. I'll give you 2 weeks. Everything must be ready by then." "Understood," replied the designer, although his voice showed a lack of confidence. 2 weeks later, Artur traveled to the mountain town to pick up Tarcisio, while Anna was at home, restless with worry. What if they didn't get along? When Artur called from the airport to confirm that the flight had landed and that they were on their way home, Anna went to the garden. It was festively adorned with balloons and lanterns. A large red battery-powered jeep and a tricycle named Anna were proudly on the lawn. "Do you think Tarcisio will like it?" Anna asked Eliana, the young girl. "Don't worry, Mrs. Lacerda. You and Mr. Lacerda will be the best parents in the world. Don't worry, just wait." The wait for her husband and Tarcisio's arrival seemed endless. Finally, Artur's car entered the courtyard. Anna approached her husband and the boy Artur was leading by the hand. "Hello, Tarcisio, do you remember me?" asked Anna. "Yes," the boy replied, nodding his head. "You are my good one." The woman hugged the child, tears welling up in her eyes. At that moment, she felt she was embracing her happiness and was prepared to do everything to ensure Tarcisio had a childhood full of wonderful memories. The boy integrated into the family with surprising ease. He was never fussy, always curious, and eagerly participated in all activities in which the adults were involved. He often stayed with Eliana in the kitchen, where she made delicious pancake-shaped pastries and baked apple pies. In the garden, Tarcisio included the guard and the gardener in his games. He boldly drove his jeep along the paths, chasing the butterflies flying by. In winter, an ice rink was set up on the lawn for Tarcisio. Artur and Anna taught him to skate. Afterwards, they all enjoyed hot tea with delicious almond cookies together. The couple was happy, they had found what was missing in their lives. When Tarcisio called Artur Dad, the man couldn't hide his tears of joy. He picked up the boy in his arms, ran around the garden, and kept asking Tarcisio to call him Papa again. 3 years later, the family celebrated Tarcisio's 5th birthday. They invited children from their friends' and partners' families for a cheerful picnic in the garden, decorated with balloons. Clowns entertained the children, while a pile of colorful gift boxes grew on the porch with each new arrival. Tarcisio was radiant, and Anna and Artur graciously welcomed the guests, who continually praised their wonderful son. Champagne and appetizers were served, and fireworks lit up the sky above the Lacerda garden at the end of the celebration to the delight of the young guests. After the party, Artur took Tarcisio to bed himself. Before falling asleep, Tarcisio made his father promise to help him unpack the presents the next day. After putting his son to bed, Artur went downstairs to the living room, where Anna was sitting, massaging her temples. "Are you not feeling well, dear?" Artur asked. "I have a headache and feel dizzy," Anna replied. "I probably drank more champagne than I should have. I think I was too excited." "Are you sure?" "I'll take some medicine and go to bed. I'll be fine in the morning. Let's go to bed." However, Anna didn't feel better in the morning. Artur left all his business aside and took his wife to the hospital. It would be a day he would remember for the rest of his life. The family doctor scolded Artur with a mysterious expression. "What does she have?" Artur asked. "Is she ill?" "Not at all," the doctor smiled. "She's perfectly healthy, just a little bit pregnant." Artur didn't immediately understand the doctor's words. He looked at the doctor as if he were a ghost that had appeared in the middle of the night trying to confuse him. "A little what?" Artur asked. "Mr. Lacerda, your wife is about 5 or 6 weeks pregnant. But we need to do a more thorough examination." When Anna left the doctor's office, she approached her husband and looked carefully into his eyes. "Dear, God has rewarded us for giving happiness and a family to Tarcisio. Now he will have a little brother or sister." 8 months later, the Lacerda family welcomed a daughter, whom they named Penelope. He tried to get her attention and often praised her. One day, he invited her for a walk after work, and surprisingly, she accepted. During the walk, Paolo maintained an animated conversation, while Sarah mostly just listened, offering brief answers. They began to see each other occasionally, mainly when Paolo could walk Sarah home after work. One day, as they said goodbye at her door, Paolo said to Sarah, "It's easy for me to be with you. Let's live together, as brother and sister, as neighbors, or perhaps as husband and wife." Sarah asked sarcastically, "Which option do you prefer? Why would you say that?" "You know what I mean," Paolo responded, somewhat offended that his words were not being taken seriously. "Come on, don't be offended," Sarah said. Shortly after, they introduced themselves to the girl's parents, and a month later, they were married. Living with Paolo initially brought Sarah joy. They had fun together, always went out, visited the cinema, and enjoyed time in nature. Soon, Sarah left her job at the supermarket to work in Paolo's store. Why pay a salesperson when you can sell the clothes yourself? All the money stays at home, Paolo persuaded. Sarah gave in to his appeals but regretted it the following winter, when severe frosts forced her to bundle up and wrap herself in shawls to avoid freezing while standing all day in a poorly heated store. "Wait a little, let's save some money and rent a space in a shopping center," Paulo persuaded her. However, Sarah felt like winter would never end, and they would never save enough money. "Take something to warm yourself up," offered a neighbor who sold women's clothing in the shop next door, handing her a bottle with a strong drink. "Take a sip, you'll feel warm immediately." That's how Sarah began bringing the same bottle to work. One day after work, she found her husband Paulo in the kitchen, with just a bottle of whiskey and a glass on the table. The man looked at her with a blurred gaze and slammed his fist on the table, startling Sarah. "You were lying," he said when Paulo stood up from the chair with a threatening and furious expression. "Paulo, I don't understand why you're talking to me like this," Sarah retreated. "You deceived me the whole time," her husband stammered. "I thought you were a modest, quiet, normal woman, but you've been meeting with men since school, and not only that, you were carrying a baby from who knows who." The burning slap brought Sarah back to reality. She held her stinging cheek, looking fearfully at her husband. Fear gave way to resentment, which manifested in tears. Sarah locked herself in the bathroom and cried for an hour. When she came out, her husband was asleep at the kitchen table, his head resting in his hands. After this incident, Sarah's family life began to deteriorate. Influenced by gossip from acquaintances and neighbors, Paulo started treating her poorly. Everyone who found out who his wife was felt compelled to reveal the truth about Sarah. The rumors and gossip fueled Paulo's anger and hurt his pride. His alcohol consumption started to increase. One night, Sarah sat in front of him at the table. "We need to have a serious conversation," she said in a calm but firm voice. "What happened in school shouldn't affect our lives now. That chapter is closed, and the past is the past. If you're unhappy living with me, I'll leave. Why didn't you tell me this personally? What's there to tell? That I gave birth, and the baby died in the hospital? Did you really need to know that?" "It would have made a big difference," Paulo shouted. "It would have changed a lot. At least I wouldn't have looked like a fool to everyone else. Everyone knew, the whole town, and I was the only one in the dark. Why did you do this to me? I didn't think it would matter to you. I thought you married me, not the gossip you're hearing now. I won't apologize, I didn't do anything wrong. Life just taught me a lesson." A single, large tear rolled down Paulo's cheek. Sarah felt sorry for her husband. She stood up from the table, approached him from behind, and hugged him. There was no serious discussion that night, but the couple's life went even more wrong. Gradually, Paulo stopped caring for the shop and restocking the inventory, so the revenue declined month by month. After 5 years, he had to close the business entirely. The following year after the closure, Paulo and Sarah were almost constantly drunk. Occasionally, alcoholic friends and acquaintances would appear, starting fights and causing disturbances to the annoyance of the neighbors. Over time, the couple spent their savings and sold their belongings for next to nothing, all in search of their next drink. In moments of clarity, Sarah realized she needed to change her lifestyle. In these moments, she would kick out guests and clean the house. Her mind urged her to stop drinking, act wisely, and change her life. However, her husband's demands for hangover cures would pull her back into old habits. It was an endless cycle. This cycle might have continued indefinitely if not for an incident that completely changed Sarah's life. One day, she was coming back from the store with a bottle in her bag. Her husband was waiting at home, but she didn't want to return. Instead, she sat on a bench in the public garden, watching the yellow leaves gently fall from the trees. It was a beautiful autumn day, the kind poets often write about. Sarah thought it was a mistake to leave the supermarket, a mistake to work at Paulo's shop, a mistake to marry Paulo. Suddenly, a dignified man in a gray overcoat approached her. "Autumn is not a time to be sad," he said, speaking to himself or to Sarah, it wasn't clear. The woman turned to look at him. The man had a kind face, with bright eyes and wrinkles at the corners, seeming about 20 years older than her. "Perhaps," she replied, "but there are many other reasons." He smiled. Indeed, there are many. For some reason, she felt a desire to talk to this man, to have someone who would sympathize with her. It was as if he sensed this, so he extended his hand to her. Sarah, she responded, and the warmth of the handshake stirred her soul, bringing a sense of unease she couldn't understand. You know, Sarah, when my wife passed away, leaving my daughters and me alone, I sought comfort in what's now in your bag, he said, noticing her surprised expression and adding, yes, don't be shocked. I saw you in the store. The woman shifted on the bench, feeling embarrassed for being called out on her drinking. She had always tried to hide her alcohol consumption from neighbors and acquaintances, but this man had easily identified her weakness. My girls were only 5 and 3, he continued. They rarely suffered because their mother wasn't there anymore. I wallowed in self-pity until I realized I could lose my daughters and end up alone. I realized alcohol wasn't the solution. You have to live for those who love you and depend on you. I have no one to live for, Sarah replied. No one loves me or depends on me. She sighed, lowering her head. If her baby had still been alive, she would have had a reason to live. But now, what did she have? A husband who couldn't control himself and wanted nothing more than a bottle. You're mistaken. You just can't see anything around you in your current state, he said. What is it? A drunk husband? I know him like the back of my hand, Sarah replied. You can continue this way if you want, but there are other options, he said calmly. You're a young and beautiful woman. Why let your life be ruined? I wouldn't call this life, Sarah said. It's mere existence. And you don't drink anymore? Very rarely, the man replied. Only on holidays. I always allow myself a drink with a good meal. I like barbecues, it's nature at its best. Glowing embers and aromatic meat on them. How could you resist a little glass of wine? Yes, Sarah smiled, it's been ages since I've been to a barbecue. Would you like to change that together? Benedito suggested. Seriously? Sarah asked, feeling uncomfortable, as if she were imposing on this man. Look at the weather, it's wonderful. I already miss trips to the countryside. Trust me, you need this right now, he exclaimed. Well, let's go, she replied, uncertain. Great. Tomorrow, same time, meet me here, the man said, standing up and shaking Sarah's hand. Until tomorrow, then, he said as he turned and walked down the path. For a while, Sarah watched this remarkable man, realizing that nothing in life happens without a reason. If fate had unexpectedly brought him into her life, it was a sign. On her way home, Sarah found herself smiling without realizing it. She hadn't felt so light and serene in a long time. When she got home in high spirits, not even Paolo, disheveled and drunk with his torn t-shirt and worn-out pants, could shake her mood. Putting the bottle in front of him, Sarah was about to leave the kitchen when he muttered, "And you? Sit down, dear, let's drink together." "No, thank you," Sarah replied firmly. She locked herself in the bathroom and stayed under the shower for a long time, feeling as if the hot water was rejuvenating her, washing away the past shocks from every cell of her skin. The next day, dressed in jeans and a jacket, she went to the park, where Benedito was already waiting. 2 teenagers were with him. "Meet Sarah. These are Mariana and Clara, my daughters," he introduced his daughters. "Nice to meet you," Sarah replied. They walked to the river and found a cozy spot. Benedito set up a grill, pulled a plastic bucket full of marinated meat, bread, and vegetables from his backpack. "Okay, girls, I'll handle the meat, you take care of the rest, all right?" he asked, turning to Sarah and his daughters. "Got it, Dad," replied the older one, Clara. Sarah noticed that Benedito's daughters were very efficient. They skillfully sliced cucumbers and tomatoes and arranged them on plastic plates. "Do you and Dad work together?" asked Mariana. "No," Sarah replied. "We recently met." "Interesting," Clara said, scrutinizing her father's new acquaintance. We thought you were a teacher too. Dad is a professor, of course. He teaches college students, Mariana proudly said. When the meat was ready, everyone sat down on a blanket that served as an improvised table. The picnic was a success. The girls were polite, though they didn't show much interest in Sarah, which made her feel better. Then they served tea from a thermos and offered it to Sarah. It's rosehip tea, the man said. I make it myself, it's a very healthy drink. Thank you. You know, I feel so comfortable in your company, Sarah confessed, as if I've known you for 100 years. I'm thrilled, Benedito responded with a smile. Sarah returned home late, when it was almost completely dark. Where were you? Did you bring any beer? Paolo asked grumpily. Go get it yourself, lazybones. I'm going to bed. Sarah closed the bedroom door. Her husband's muttering could still be heard for a while, and then the front door slammed. The next day, Sarah went early to the supermarket where she used to work, and she was hired again. A month later, on her way home, she saw Benedito. Hello, Sarah. Hello, the woman smiled. How did you end up here? Oh, actually, I'm waiting for you. For me? Why? Sarah wondered. I want to talk to you. They walked down the alley in silence. Suddenly, Benedito stopped and began to speak. He mentioned that he was no longer young and said he didn't think there would be another woman in his life. He talked about his daughters, who needed the care of a woman. After a brief pause, he said, Sarah, I've been offered a good position at the department in the regional city. They're providing a spacious apartment. Will you come with us? What do you mean? Sarah asked, confused. Just come with me. I don't ask anything from you, just be there for me. Be my friend, my companion for the rest of my life, the man pleaded, looking into her eyes with hope. But as Sarah began to object, he silenced her with his hand. Don't say anything. You have a week, he handed her a business card. Here's my phone number. If you agree to my proposal, I'll be very happy. Now, let me walk you home, it's late and dark. They walked to Sarah's place in silence. No words were needed. She already knew. She wanted to be near this mature, intelligent, wise man. A week later, with just a bag of belongings, she left with Benedito and his daughters to the regional city, leaving behind her alcoholic husband and a life of despair. At the Louis mansion, a festive atmosphere prevailed. It had been 23 years since Tarcisio joined the family. Over those years, the couple never regretted adopting him. However, they decided not to reveal the secret of his birth. They loved him deeply, and their affection was reciprocated by the boy. No one was more precious to him than his mother and father, except for his younger sister, Penelope. They were inseparable. When Penelope was a baby, her older brother could spend hours with her. The 5-year age gap made him feel wise and authoritative. He always took his sister to the garden, read books to her, and even taught her how to build a snowman. Now, Tarcisio was finishing his studies abroad and was supposed to come home for the holidays. Eliana prepared a sumptuous lunch, including Tarcisio's favorite pie. When the car pulled into the yard, Penelope ran to greet her brother. Tarcisio, she exclaimed, hugging him tightly. I'm so happy you're here. Hush, you wild thing, Tarcisio laughed, following Penelope. Anna and Arthur also stepped out onto the terrace. Everyone was in a good mood. How was your flight, son? Arthur asked, hugging Tarcisio. It was good, Dad, Tarcisio replied after embracing and kissing his mother. Everyone entered the house. Once settled in the living room, the parents couldn't help but admire their son. He's grown so much, Anna exclaimed. I can't believe our little boy is all grown up. What did you expect? That he would stay small, chasing a ball in the yard and sneaking sweets from Eliana in the kitchen? Arthur joked. The family spent the entire day at home, enjoying each other's company, watching their grown children play. Anna was happy, though her husband's health was the only thing dampening her joy. Anna was woken up in the middle of the night by her husband's cries of pain. Arthur's condition had worsened, and he could no longer bear it. "Stay calm, dear. I'll get you a pill right now," Anna said, getting out of bed. "There's no need. I've already taken one." "It's not helping," he replied, breathing heavily. "What should I do?" Anna grabbed her phone from the nightstand and called for an ambulance. When the ambulance arrived at the mansion, the whole family was awake. Tarcisio and Penelope were unaware of their father's illness. Their parents had skillfully hidden it from them to avoid causing extra worry. Arthur was taken to the hospital, with his wife accompanying him. That night, no one in the house managed to sleep. Eliana, dressed in a robe and colorful shawl, prepared coffee for the young ones. "Eliana, did you know?" Tarcisio asked the housekeeper. "Did you know that Dad was sick?" "I knew, my dear, but I was strictly forbidden to talk about it," she replied, placing cups of aromatic coffee in front of Penelope and Tarcisio. "Let's keep our hopes up." "Penelope, we need to go to the hospital," Tarcisio declared. "I'm going to take a shower, freshen up, and then head there." "I'll go with you." Anna was sitting in the hospital corridor, her gaze fixed on the blinking "Do Not Enter" sign. "How's Dad?" Penelope wrapped her arms around her mother, clinging to her clothes. "He's not well, dear. But he'll get better, right? They'll help him, won't they?" "I don't know, my love. All we can do is have faith and hope." "Mom, where's the doctor?" "I want to talk to him," Tarcisio said calmly. Anna gestured weakly toward the end of the corridor. The young man walked confidently toward the doctor's office. After knocking on the door, he entered and found the doctor sitting at his desk. "Hello, I'm Tarcisio, the son of your patient, Arthur Lacerda." "Sit down, young man," the doctor suggested. "The test results have just come in. Your father's condition is serious. It's quite advanced. Is there nothing that can be done?" Tarcisio asked anxiously. "We need a donor, but it's difficult to find one in such a short time." "Who can be a donor?" "In theory, close relatives and people compatible with the patient." "Then let me be the donor." Tarcisio jumped up from his chair. "Your willingness is admirable, young man, but you'll need to be tested first." "Of course, I'm ready," Tarcisio said as he left for the corridor. He approached his mother and sister. "Mom, Dad needs a donor. Blood relatives are the most likely to be compatible." "I said I'm ready." Anna looked at her son, her eyes darkened by sadness, devoid of hope. "No, son, it probably won't work," she said. "But why not?" "I want to help my father." "I don't want to lose him," Tarcisio exclaimed, indignant and puzzled by his mother's despair. "I'm young, I'm healthy. I'll recover quickly. For Dad, it's a matter of life and death." "Stop and listen to me," his mother ordered firmly, wiping her tears with a handkerchief. "You cannot be your father's donor. You are not his blood relative." Tarcisio froze, as if a bucket of cold water had been thrown over him. It was beyond his worst nightmares to hear such words from his mother. Then, she added, "You are not his biological child. You are adopted." "What are you saying, Mom?" Penelope asked, frightened. "You're not well. We should call a doctor." "It's true," Anna responded. "When we get home, I will tell you everything." "It seems the time has come," she said bitterly, sitting quietly in the chair, rocking back and forth, lost in thought. Meanwhile, Tarcisio slowly walked down the corridor, eager to escape into the fresh air. His head was spinning with the words he had just heard, words that would change his life forever. Tarcisio stepped out into the cold night air, his mind in turmoil. The revelation had hit him like a hammer, shattering everything he thought he knew. For years, he had believed he was Arthur and Anna's biological son, and now, in the most desperate moment of his life, he discovered he wasn't. He walked aimlessly around the hospital grounds, trying to process this new reality. He recalled moments from his childhood, small things that now seemed like clues, whispers between his parents when they thought he wasn't listening, the strange looks from distant relatives. All those moments made sense now. He wasn't their blood, he wasn't Arthur's real son. But they had loved him, hadn't they? His mother's tears, the worry in her voice, his father's endless encouragement, the warm embraces and laughter. How could that love be any less real just because he was adopted? And yet, the pain of not being able to help Arthur in his hour of need gnawed at him. Tarcisio's phone buzzed in his pocket, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Penelope. "Where are you?" "Mom's been looking for you," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm outside," he replied. "Just needed some air." There was a pause before she spoke again, softer this time. "I can't believe it, Tarcisio." "What Mom said? How did we not know?" "I don't know," Tarcisio said, his voice heavy. "But it doesn't matter now. We need to focus on Dad. I don't know what we'll do without him if he doesn't make it," Penelope whispered, her voice breaking. "He'll make it," Tarcisio said, though the conviction in his words faltered. "He has to." After ending the call, he stayed outside for a while longer, looking up at the sky, searching for answers, clarity, anything that could help him make sense of this chaos. Eventually, he knew he had to go back inside. His family needed him now more than ever. When he returned to the waiting area, Anna was sitting where he had left her, still lost in her thoughts. Penelope sat beside her, clutching her mother's hand, her eyes red from crying. "Mom, we need to talk," Tarcisio said softly as he approached. Anna looked up at him, her face lined with exhaustion and grief. "There's so much to say, but this is neither the time nor place," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it is the time," Tarcisio countered gently. "I need to understand. How could you keep this from me? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Anna sighed deeply, as if the weight of the secret had been pressing on her for far too long. "We didn't want to hurt you. We wanted to protect you, to give you a normal life. You were so young when we adopted you. Arthur and I thought it was best if you never knew. But I deserved to know the truth," Tarcisio said, frustration and hurt lacing his words. "Especially now. You should have trusted me." "I know," Anna said, her eyes filling with tears again. "But you were our son in every way that mattered. We never wanted you to feel different, to feel like you didn't belong. We love you, Tarcisio. More than anything." Tarcisio sat down next to his mother, his own heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He didn't know how to respond to her, so he just sat in silence, trying to let her words sink in. He knew she was right. They had loved him, and they had given him a good life. But the pain of the secret, the timing of the revelation, made it all so much harder to accept. A doctor approached them, breaking the tense silence. Anna quickly stood up, her eyes wide with worry. "Mrs. Lacerda," the doctor began, "we've stabilized your husband for now, but his condition remains critical. We're doing everything we can, but time is not on our side. I wanted to inform you that it's important to prepare for all possibilities." Anna nodded, her lips trembling as she processed the doctor's words. Tarcisio felt his heart drop, the weight of impending loss pressing down on him. "Can we see him?" Penelope asked in a shaky voice. The doctor nodded. "Only for a short time, and one at a time." Anna turned to her children. "You two go first. I'll come later." Tarcisio hesitated but then nodded. He and Penelope followed the doctor down the corridor to their father's room. As they reached the door, Penelope stepped aside, allowing her brother to go in first. Tarcisio entered the room, his heart racing. Arthur lay on the bed, pale and weak, hooked up to monitors and machines that beeped softly. The sight of his father like this, so fragile, nearly broke him. "Dad," Tarcisio whispered as he approached the bed. Arthur's eyes fluttered open, and he smiled weakly when he saw his son. "Tarcisio," he said, his voice faint but filled with warmth. "You're here." "I'm here, Dad," Tarcisio said, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. He sat down by the bedside and took his father's hand. "I'm sorry, son," Arthur said softly. "For everything." "Don't be," Tarcisio replied, squeezing his father's hand. "You've given me everything I ever needed. You're my father. Nothing can change that." Arthur's eyes filled with tears. "I'm proud of you, Tarcisio. You've grown into a fine man." Tarcisio couldn't hold back the tears any longer. He bent down and hugged his father gently, trying to convey all the love, gratitude, and pain he felt in that moment. "I love you, Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I love you too, son," Arthur replied, his voice barely audible. As Tarcisio sat there, holding his father's hand, he realized that no matter what, he would carry Arthur's love and legacy with him for the rest of his life. People were in a hurry, rushing somewhere, cars sped by at dizzying speeds, and the soul of the woman, who had grown old and gray with sadness, was empty. There was no more life inside her. Sarah bought a potato pie and tea from a street vendor, then found a spot on a park bench to think. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there. Beside her on the bench was still the untouched pie and a cold tea when night fell over the city. "Excuse me, are you feeling unwell?" Sarah heard a voice that seemed to come from above. She looked up to see a stranger holding a large dog by its leash. The woman sat down beside her. "What happened to you? Should I call an ambulance?" she asked, as the accumulated sorrow within Sarah broke into a flood of tears. She sobbed uncontrollably. The woman handed her a small bottle of water from her bag. Once Sarah calmed down, the stranger introduced herself. "My name is Jean. It's late, you can't stay here. Let's go to my place." Jean helped Sarah to her feet, and she followed without protest. Once again, God supported Sarah by sending her a savior. Jean felt so much for the fate of the older woman that she couldn't let her go anywhere. She had been through a lot in her own life. The woman had 4 children, and her husband had died when the youngest was less than a month old. "Stay with us. There's enough space for everyone," Jean offered the next morning. Initially, Sarah resisted, but Jean persuaded her, arguing that she needed help with the children and that Sarah could take on the role of their grandmother. That's exactly what happened. Jean's 2 sons and 2 daughters proved to be bright and affectionate children. Within a week, they were telling friends and neighbors that their grandmother had arrived. Everyone in the large apartment building got to know Sarah, and they all treated her with respect. Thus, Sarah, who seemed destined for loneliness after Benedito's death, found a family again in Jean and her 4 children. Now she was waiting for Jean, who had gone downstairs to speak to strangers. "Who are you?" Jean asked the well-dressed young man standing next to a huge black jeep, peering through the windows. "I'm looking for Sarah," the young man replied. "Does she live here? Maybe you could introduce yourself first and explain what this is about." Jean responded skeptically. "Of course. My name is Tarcisio. From what I've gathered, Sarah is probably my biological mother." Jean's eyebrows shot up. "As far as I know, Sarah doesn't have any children. Let me meet her and talk to her. It's the only way to find out the truth." "I'll take you to her, but be careful," Jean said, heading toward the entrance. The 2 security guards followed Tarcisio, but he stopped them. "Wait here, please." Sarah placed the kettle on the stove and sat at the table. 10 minutes later, Jean entered the kitchen, followed by the young man Sarah had noticed earlier on the ground floor when she had looked out the window. "Sarah, I don't understand anything, but this man needs to talk to you," Jean said, sounding confused. "I'll leave you two alone." She sent the children, who had been watching the guest curiously, into the bedroom near the door and invited Tarcisio to sit down. Then she sat down herself. The man remained silent, staring at Sarah's face. Sarah felt as if she had seen this young man somewhere before. His face seemed familiar, but she couldn't remember where from. "Are you Sarah?" Tarcisio finally asked. "My name is Tarcisio. For many years, I've been searching for my mother, who left me at the maternity hospital." Jean and Sarah exchanged surprised glances. How could they help this man? After a brief silence, Tarcisio continued his story. "I never knew I was adopted until my father was on his deathbed. It was then that my mother, emotionally overwhelmed, revealed that she and my father had adopted me when I was very young. At first, I was furious and even left home. Eventually, however, I calmed down and began searching for my biological mother. All I knew was the name of the town and that my mother, at 16, had left me at the maternity hospital shortly after my birth. I imagined countless times how I would meet her and express my feelings toward mothers like her. But then I would mentally thank her for my existence. After all, I have a happy and prosperous life, the best parents in the world, and a sister whom I deeply love. Unfortunately, all my searches led nowhere. The trail grew cold at the maternity hospital. There had been a small fire, and the documents were lost. No one remembered me, except for a young janitor who had been cleaning the hospital hallway at the time of my birth. She overheard a conversation between the doctor and the grandfather of a premature newborn. The grandfather demanded to sign a waiver. "I am her father. My daughter is a minor, so I have the right to decide for her," the man stated loudly. The janitor was so deeply affected by the father's decision that she remembered the incident for the rest of her life. She also told me that she had heard the young mother was informed that her baby had died. But she herself saw that the boy was sent to the orphanage. That's when I realized that my own mother didn't know I was alive, and I got the clues that led me to you." Tarcisio fell silent. He looked at Sarah, who listened to the story in silence. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She couldn't believe that her father could have committed such a cruel act. He was gone now, and there was no one to question. Sarah was filled with both sadness and joy at the realization that her son was alive. She wanted to get up and hug him, but her body remained frozen in place. Tears also streamed down Tarcisio's face, and he struggled with a lump in his throat. Finally, he swallowed hard and declared confidently, "I found you, Mother. Now we will never be apart again." I hope you enjoyed the short story. Comment and share. Thank you for watching.